The Republic of Kiribati is a country of 32 atolls and one raised coral island in the Central Pacific Ocean. It has a total land area of 811 square kilometres, which is about the size of 1/4 of the ACT.
Its islands are dispersed over a large area of ocean, just under half the size of Australia. Kiribati has a population of just over 110,000, more than half of whom live on the Tarawa Atoll. Kiribati is expected to be the first country this century to lose its land to global warming.
In 2008, Kiribati President Anote Tong said that the country had reached the point of no return. He added, "To plan for the day when you no longer have a country is indeed painful, but I think we have to do that."
My people, living on low-lying atoll islands, no higher than 3 meters above sea level, face a very uncertain future, with the very real possibility of loss of life, as they know it now, the very real possibility of loss of their identity as a people.
In 2013, Kiribati purchased 2,200 hectares on the second largest island of Fiji to support a plan to evacuate the entire population of Kiribati. This was a move described by Anote Tong as an absolute necessity should the nation be completely submerged because of climate change.
In 2013, President Tong spoke of climate change sea level rise as inevitable. He said, "For our people to survive, they will have to migrate. Either we can wait for the time when we have to move people en masse, or we can prepare them, beginning from now." As one of the world's most vulnerable nations to the effects of global warming, Kiribati has been an active participant in international diplomatic efforts relating to climate change. Kiribati is a member of the Alliance of Small Island States, an organisation of low-lying coastal and small island countries. Established in 1990, the main purpose of the alliance is to be a voice for small island states to address global warming.
His Excellency Anote Tong is the former President of the Republic of Kiribati. Educated in New Zealand at the University of Canterbury and in England at the London School of Economics, President Tong holds a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Economics. He has for many years been a strong climate change advocate, building worldwide awareness of the potentially devastating impacts of climate change, in particular for small island and low-lying states like Kiribati.
Even though it has one of the lowest carbon emission footprints in the world, Anote Tong has often described Kiribati as a frontline country because it was among the first to experience dramatic climate change impacts. He has stated on many occasions that Kiribati may cease to exist altogether and that its entire population may need to be resettled because of the devastating effects of climate change.
He rejects the term climate change refugees and believes that people displaced by climate change should be citizens who migrate on merit and with dignity.
Across the world, students have been striking in support of real action on climate change.
This is a path we cannot continue to go down. The science is clear. Our voices are united today, and we cannot keep doing things the same way.
Today's student interviewer is 17-year-old Priya Leeden. Priya is a student at Radford College and a member of the Dirrum 2020 team. She is passionate about science, conservation and climate politics. Also interviewing today is 18-year-old Dani Gilbert, a proud young Wiradjuri woman who is passionate about doing what she can to achieve more inclusive, safe, sustainable and just outcomes in our community. She is a youth leader in action on climate change, including speaking at climate strikes in the ACT.
We are striking because our futures depend on the action that can and must be taken now to address climate change.
Anote Tong has built worldwide awareness of the potentially devastating impacts of climate change. It's an absolute honour to welcome him to speak as part of Dirrum Festival 2020.
Welcome, Your Excellency. It's sad you're not in Australia with us, but nor are you home in Kiribati. When you think of home, what comes to mind?
Well, home, I think, to each and every one of us, home is always somewhere where we feel comfortable, we feel safe, and it's the best place we ever want to be. Okay, but in terms of what Kiribati is a different world from what we have even here in Fiji. It's different from Australia. It's Kiribati is a series of low-lying island countries, and it's I remember going from Kiribati to New Zealand as a young lad studying, and I remember that the total dislocation, the cultural shock, and just trying to come to terms with the world that I've just moved into, where I don't see the sea. At home, every day, almost every moment, you're seeing the ocean, both sides of the ocean, both sides. And so, in spite of basically being the same, there are some very, very distinct differences which really make you feel different when you visit different countries. I know when I'm in Australia that I am in a different country.
Yeah, awesome. So the other question we have, well, one of the questions we have for you is, what is it that first alerted you to the gravity of what we now call climate change?
Well, I think my answer to that one has got to do with my first answer because, as I said, Kiribati are a series of low-lying islands, barely, on average, 2 meters above sea level. And every once in a while, we get waves coming over, flooding. It's not unusual. We just move our stuff around or we move back a little bit and the waves come, but we know that's the tide goes, they go. Once in a while, we get some very much more severe storms, and so we get some damage. And so reading the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports and the projections that they were predicting, for me, were disastrous in the context of what I have explained, the situation that we are. And so any marginal rise in sea level is bound to have a very significant impact on the lives of people on the islands. We already are hugely challenged, but when you think about the rise in sea level, the global warming and its implications on the changing weather pattern, and so all of that for me was more serious, and because one of the things I tried to do was what am I going to say at the United Nations General Assembly? Because everybody else is talking about GDP, whatever else, developmental issues, and of course, at the time that I started, the focus was on terrorism, which was something that has no relevance to our lives. Okay, and so in trying to identify what is it that would be important that I need to make a statement on to the international community, and for me, there was just one thing: it was climate change, and for us, it's a worrying issue. And by then, the fourth assessment report hadn't come out. But the previous reports were making these projections. Of course, at that time, there was still a controversy over the science, whether the science was valid or there was still a lot of debate. But whatever it was, even if it was a very marginal possibility that it was going to happen, I believe we need to take notice of that. And this is why I began to talk about it and started telling people, and they started screaming when nobody would listen to me, because nobody listened to me initially at the United Nations General Assembly. Nobody cared. There was this obsessive focus on other issues. Nobody ever talked about climate change at the General Assembly. There were the discussions of it at a different forum, but not at the highest international political level.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy for us in Australia to not see the effects of climate change every day. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing already and what you're seeing right now in Kiribati?
Well, we've been seeing a lot of events, and but we've lived with these things, okay? And we always believe that they will come and they will go. But what the IPCC was saying is different. It's going to come and keep coming and keep coming. Now that is different. It's not what we thought were normal cycles. We're being told by the scientists, that is no longer to be the case, because the world climate is changing, has changed, and is changing. So what did we experience? We experienced the normal floodings, okay, periodic floodings. But we couldn't continue to say that they were the part of the normal cycle anymore. And then we got some worse than usual floodings. And of course, we began to, in 2015, we got the cyclone Pam coming our way. That's not supposed to happen. You understand your geography, I'm sure. The cyclones and hurricanes come from us. Okay, we don't create them or send them down to other parts of the world, but they do. They do come from they originate from the equator. But this time they're coming back. And of course, with Cyclone Pam, all of Tuvalu was flooded. Our southern islands were also flooded. Flooded means that the water coming over. The rest were also flooded, but to a lesser extent, to the point where a lot of food crops were actually destroyed. And so all of that was a more severe impact. But during all of this time, we've been having floodings, and so they damaged the waterlands, they damaged food crops. Sometimes we've had communities having to leave or move from where they were, okay? And without building seawalls, their homes would be taken away. And so that's been the experience we've been having, okay? And so it's no longer part of the normal cycle.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Only a lot of people here could see that and see what's happening in other parts of the world.
In a lot of countries where I speak, there is this belief that what I'm talking about has no relevance to them. And I do remember speaking in Australia, in Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, about climate change. And I did challenge people. I know a lot of you people sitting here listening to me think that climate change has no relevance to your lives. But I know you get your bushfires, you get your storms, but maybe next year, the next bushfires may not affect you, but it may affect people that you know, your family. Maybe the droughts will affect people that you know, which it only indicates that even if it doesn't get to you this decade, if we don't do anything about it, it's going to get to you the next decade. And that is the reality. And of course, we know what happened in 2019 with the bushfires that you experienced. So, I mean, that's a loud statement. And I believe your politicians began to take notice of this.
We sure hope they did.
We're still trying.
Okay.
So we've talked a little bit about the current situation in the world. Just a question for you. So since you agreed to come to Australia before, COVID-19 swept the planet. There's some pretty outstanding examples of responses to the crisis in places where science and evidence have been respected and actually taken seriously for once. Do you think this new understanding that we have may help to accelerate the shift from arguing over climate change or climate science to instead acting upon it?
I desperately hope so. I desperately hope that those who have denied that climate science is not valid will now listen to what the scientists are doing. I know that before the fourth and assessment report, there was still this controversy, as I said, but by the fourth assessment report, it was fairly conclusive that the science was correct. Really, the question is, when is it? When is it coming? And I'm always being asked, so when do your people have to go? Of course, I don't know. But I know that it's going to happen one day. And so what COVID-19 has a very loud message that we're being told is COVID-19 is, we can't see it, okay? They're small microorganisms that invade the body, but they have the capacity to paralyze the world, the global economy, everything. And so people are suffering in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And so all of the sacrifices that we've been asking to be made so that we can deal with climate change, the economic costs. Now, what COVID-19 is costing is possibly a lot more than it would have cost to deal with climate change on a gradual, progressive manner, okay? And so, but I think the basic message that needs to be taken on board is, let's listen to the science. I was asked in Madrid, and I said, the scientists are our prophets of today. I mean, we in the Old Testament, there were prophets. Now we have people with the knowledge bestowed, endowed to them by God. And so we should listen to people. And the science of climate change is absolutely, I mean, there is no more any question that is not right. I think we just continue to not act. I think that's the only difference. The science is sound. but we don't have the sound mind to absorb the fact that the information coming forward by the science. And why? I think simply because for the reason that those whom we need to act, because it's not you, it's not me. If we act, it's a small, very minuscule impact. But it's the large corporations who will continue to dig this stuff out of the deep earth that really need to do something about it. And so far, that is not their priority. Their priority is about amassing their wealth. I think sometimes I am critical of capitalism because this is what it promotes. Okay, we need to value people more than material things. I think that there has to be a change of world perspective. So I think let's not argue anymore. Let's get into action. And I think I've been watching what's been happening because, as I said, for a long time I was quite alone in what I was doing. Then a lot of leaders started joining me. And of course, I'm now not on the forefront. But what I find so gratifying is young people like yourselves taking up the baton. And I think I do have some advice for you later, but I think we have a question relating to that because it's something that I've always wondered: how do I get my message to the people that really need to act? Because they're hearing but they're not listening, or they're listening but they're not hearing. All right?
Yeah.
Because they still consider that it has nothing to do with their lives. Or what is worse, and I hope this is not true, is they say, oh, it's going to affect those people like me, but not them, because they have the capacity to stay above the waters, to stay cool when it's so hot. And I think
and that's absolutely be wrong.
Then it becomes a deeply moral issue. Okay?
It does indeed.
And this is something that we need to address, because sometimes I believe that the people who think like that do not have the moral conscience to listen to you or I. And so we have to do it in a different way. Okay? Are you hearing me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So at the Paris Climate Conference in 2015, countries vulnerable to the impacts of climate change said that it was perhaps our generation's last opportunity to meaningfully address climate change. But some Australian politicians, unfortunately, have continued to deny climate change, as you say. Some even joke about rising sea levels and encroachment in the Pacific. Is the world really listening and acting on climate change? And how do we get those in power to take this seriously?
As I said earlier, this is the question that I've never been able to find the magic answer to, okay? And I have been looking for it, and I get asked a lot, how do you get this message across to people who are not listening? And again, it's because, I believe it's because with COVID-19, okay, people are dying, dropping dead. That's not happening with climate change, okay? But regrettably, when that starts happening, when communities start getting swept away and and people dying from the heat wave and people losing homes from the bushfires, that is not the time to act, because by then it would be too late. And I'm hoping that political leaders are listening to this. And but I don't think so. It's amazing the capacity of people not to listen. And I think quite often I ask myself, are we challenging the right people? Are the governments the right people, the right institutions that we should be asking to do something about it? Because they're not listening. Because for some reason, climate change has become a political issue. And you know this very well in Australia. I know it in different countries, that when there is a change of government, then climate change no longer becomes important. And I think in the US, that's been the case. In Australia, that was the case. I hope it's still not the case after the fires. But in New Zealand, I had the experience of confronting your leaders, from Australia and New Zealand, who were saying climate change is we don't want the cut. emissions too much, because it would be terrible for our economies. And I was there saying, no, come on, you can't be serious. For us, climate change is about the survival of people. This is why we need to address it. And so really the question is, are the governments the ones we should be dealing with, or is it the corporations who support the governments? You know, you're young, smart young people, but I was in Sydney University once, and I was speaking, and one of the academics said, oh, what has happened is, he referred to a term called regulatory capture. What it means is that those who are supposed to regulate, meaning the government, have been captured by the ones they're supposed to regulate. In other words, they're no longer in control. And I think this may be the crux of what is the problem. That the governments are no longer in control, but are being controlled. If that is true, then I feel so sad for our democratic system of governance. But it is your world, and you must do something about it. Don't leave it to us because we are incompetent. All we think about is the next election, not the next generation. And that is terribly sad.
Yeah, the next generation will be a major focus, particularly for young people and ourselves as we kind of grow up and take action in those spaces. Speaking of taking action in those spaces, we listened to your speech at the Universal Peace Federation World Summit in 2015, and you spoke really passionately about the loss of land being so much more than just the physical loss. The loss of land impacts cultural, community, place and heritage-based identity. How have you seen this play out for your people?
You know, we're not a migrant population, okay? We are an indigenous people. And so for us, being uprooted from our homeland is going to mean something terrible, a drastic change to our lifestyle, okay? I mean, I often ask questions of the audiences when I speak, and I ask, who are indigenous here? And maybe one or two hands will go up, okay? But I would ask the next question. So what about the rest of you? Are you aliens? Because the point is, we're all indigenous to this land. If we are not from this country, particular island or country, we are here. So let's connect and relate to it. Okay, and so for people in my country to lose that connection to a place where they've grown up, and because we have a very communal lifestyle, and so you connect in many respects, okay, spiritually, okay. I know we're highly Christianized, but we haven't lost our connection with our own spiritual world. And so, one, if people are just dislocated, then all of this would be lost. The part of your identity is your culture, your being that, okay? Yeah, I can't imagine, because when you speak to anyone from my country, you'll ask him and they say, oh, so where are you from? And he say, yeah, I'm from that island. Do you understand this? He may say, he may say, I am from Kiribati, but not any island in Kiribati, but a particular island in Kiribati. And so that would be lost. And so that part of its identity would be lost. The culture, the identity, and unless something is to replace it, it's going to result in something being lost in the soul of the people who would be displaced. And so it's not just migrating, it's actually about feeling at peace with your surroundings, okay? And so it's not going to be an easy process. Relocation is never going to be an easy process. Maybe for the younger people, but for the older people, I know a lot of our people moved to New Zealand, Australia, under the migration scheme, and they've come back because they just cannot survive. It's a different world from what they know, okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. I come from a First Nations background in Australia. My mob is the Wiradjuri, and they're a very large portion of New South Wales. But I know that physical place and the cultural significance of being in a physical place is so important, and identity is so heavily related to that connection to country. And I can't imagine living in a circumstance where I would have to lose all possible connection to that place because people in higher power aren't taking action on things that they really should be taking action on.
Absolutely the case. There would be something missing, which is really irreplaceable. And so, we talk about biodiversity. Okay, that would be one loss of biodiversity.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a great deal that would be lost. You cannot count it in monetary terms. You cannot count it and quantify it in any other way, but it is as deep as anything that you can see, that you can feel.
Yeah, it's absolutely devastating, the potential dislocation of the people of Kiribati. So when do you think we might see this large-scale migration due to the rising sea levels? And how should migration happen on what you have described as merit and dignity?
When I started putting these ideas together, I was totally lost because I didn't know where this was going. Nobody was talking about it. And it was going in nowhere. And my greatest fear was to be asked by my people, okay, we're hearing this, we are scared. What have you planned? Because my answer would have been, my very honest answer would have been to say, there is nothing we can do about it, it's all exists. But at the same time, that's not a good enough answer. One does not deserve to be a leader if that is the kind of answer you're going to get. So I started dreaming up all kinds of crazy ideas. And I don't know if you have seen some of the documentaries that I have made. And I talk about floating islands. I talk about raising the island. I talk about migration, okay? But I've never believed that we need to, there is always that something that even if we need to relocate, we must at least try to preserve something of that nation of Kiribati. It cannot be a nation that was once there and is no longer there. And so I believe that until today, I believe that we cannot mobilize the resources to raise all of the islands. Nobody's going to give us the money, and we don't have it. And my idea was to raise a few islands so that we can maintain the nation of Kiribati, and those of our people who want to stay, who choose to stay, will have somewhere to stay. Those who make the choice to go must be given the preparation, the proper preparation to be equipped to move into the new societies they decide to go into. And I'm saying maybe training, upskilling, so that if and when they move to the countries they go to, there would be people with qualifications who would be worthwhile. And I joke to my people, I say, and I'd love to see one of you people one day become a prime minister in this country. And that's not unrealistic. Really, it's not unrealistic. And that is the idea of migration with dignity, because I don't see the possibility of all of our people, current level of population, and growing number of people, being able to be accommodated in a climate resilient country that we would build. It's not going to be easy. And so I always acknowledge the brutal reality that some of our people not only will have to move, but will actually want to move. Okay, I know that I'm often criticized for saying what I'm saying, but I'm not saying we all go. I'm saying those that choose to go must be provided with the proper preparations to go. And nor is it realistic for any government to say none of our people are going, because that's not your choice. Yeah. Everybody will make that choice, okay? But as a government, you have the responsibility to prepare those that choose to go, okay?
Yeah.
So and those that choose to go, I think let's not move people at the very last moment, okay? That would be the worst thing to do. But begin the process now. Understand that it's not about waiting for it to happen and then panicking. And it's a panic reaction. We know it's inevitable. Our common sense, listening to the science, tells us that it's on. Those that decide to go, let's do it for them. And so the process begins. Not in 10 years, even today. And so governments should begin to do this. If and when they choose to come back, they're always welcome to come back.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. But if they choose to move today, let's make that possible and let's make it happen. And let's make it happen in a very dignified manner so that they're well trained and not only, but it's got to be a two-way process. I've spoken to people from Germany, who, of course, you know, the massive migration from North Africa into Europe, okay? And Germany is one of the most tolerant countries. And I met some of these people on the cruise. And I asked them, okay, how are you feeling with this massive migration? Because I know in Germany, you're very tolerant. And they said, yes, at the beginning, it was okay, but we're beginning to wonder, where is it going? And so there has got to be education or awareness on both sides by the people migrating and also the people who will be the receiving community. So there is that integration, and we avoid the tensions that will always bound to happen, okay? And that is what I call migration with dignity. And don't worry, I hope some of our people who migrate will become prime minister one day in Australia. Okay?
Yeah.
Well, I would vote for that.
Well, as I said, you only need to influence one person to make a difference.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I'm challenging you girls one day. I know you asked a number of questions, but you want to know how you can make the greatest impact? Be a leader, be a politician, okay? And if not a politician, a leader in the industrial world. Even today, first thing you do is you vote. Influence people to vote to save your world.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I've always said that where we need to make a difference now is in a socio-political framework. Would you agree with that? Where the difference is, we've got the technology, we've got the science behind us. Would you say the difference needs to be made in our parliaments, in our communities?
Yeah, we just need to get our politicians to care. You know,
Yeah.
I believe that our politicians must forget about being politicians, because being a politician is a different animal, okay? But they must not think as politicians, because politicians think in four-year term periods, or whatever the election period is. You know, they're worried about the next election. They don't want to put into place the things that would cut emissions, because why? They think it would affect the economy, which would affect their chances of re-election. But they must think as parents, as grandparents, okay? They must think as people who have a responsibility for the future generation. And I think that is important. We cannot continue to say that we are Christians, we are extremely, compassionate. If we don't do any of that, we've got to have a longer term vision of what climate change is all about. It's not about the next election, it's about the next generation. And we've got to get down and grasp that reality.
Exactly. That is a major focus point. In talking about that, every year since 1995, the United Nations has hosted climate change conferences. But in April this year, the UN announced that this year's conference would be postponed due to COVID-19. How should international communities in particular continue to address the long-term challenge of climate change in the face of other emergencies and disasters like COVID-19?
I'm going to ask you a question in response to your question.
Go for it.
Shoot.
Okay, how effective do you believe these international conferences are in addressing the issue? Okay, how effective have they been? Okay, look at the Paris Agreement in 2015. How far have we gone? We haven't cut our emissions by much. In fact, it's gone up. And so we must not continue to believe that these conferences, international conferences, are it. Okay.
Yeah.
We must tackle it at the root cause of the problem. So even if there is no conference this year or next year, it shouldn't stop us from attacking and going to the root cause of the problem. What is it? I know there's been a lot of activity in Australia with respect to the coal mining industry. I'm so glad to hear that it's pulling back a little bit. And I'm glad to hear that the number of organizations have cut back funding. And so it needs to be, because in 2012, I called for a moratorium on the opening of new coal mines, because everybody knows it's bad, including those who are doing coal mining. But yet they continue to do it, okay? And so why? Because they got riches coming out of it, and they do not care about your future, about my home, okay? And so that's the kind of message that I've been doing over the last almost 20 years now, and it hasn't made a great deal of difference. Sometimes I get a little bit depressed, am I doing anything? I think about giving up and just saying, let me enjoy my life for however long I have left. But so it's not about the conferences. It's about tackling the heart of the matter. What is the heart of the matter? Go and tackle the corporations who continue to do this. Go and tackle the financial institutions who continue to support us. I mean, I heard with the Adani project that some funding has been withdrawn.
Yep.
Go for more.
Absolutely.
Go and find some more funding sources to pull back. And they will ask you why, because so I can have a future. Okay?
Exactly.
It's a simple message, but it's so true.
You've talked a little bit about how conferences like the United Nations Climate Change Conference are not necessarily the most effective. And I agree there. I think a lot of people are able to talk about climate change and these problems, but it's hard for them to follow up on their actions and actually take a proactive approach, which is why I admire you in taking that proactive approach. But how do we hold these people and these politicians and leaders accountable for what they've promised?
I was asked the same question in 2015 on my way to Paris, I think in Melbourne, I think.
Yeah.
I think they were trying to make me fight your politicians. I don't do that, okay? Because I didn't elect them. You elected them. You understand that? Okay, so take the responsibility for your actions. And I think that's an important point to make. But no, I totally agree. One of my greatest disappointments has been the ineffectiveness of the UN system to deal with global issues like climate change. Because what we do when we go to these negotiations is we come representing our individual governments with our own individual national agenda. Do you understand? Yeah. And so each will be thinking about the next election. That is the brief they've had from the headquarters. Yeah. They're not giving the brief, okay, to go and do the best that will save the next generation. If that was the brief, I think it would be simpler. And I think the United Nations or the international organization that's supposed to do this would have done what it's supposed to do. And the reason is because we continue to divide, to pull the United Nations, because there is no single piece of legislation to regulate the behavior of those that behave badly. I begin to think that we must criminalize the actions of those who know that what they're doing is detrimental to the health and the future of young people and continue to do it. I think they should be regarded as criminals or something like that. Because this is why they're so free to do it, because they're so powerful to swing the legislators, the regulators, because they've captured them. Yeah. Exactly. So we need to change that. And come on, I want them to hear me speaking, because that is exactly what they need. Let's make them uncomfortable, because they're comfortable. They lock themselves in their multi-story buildings and make these decisions that does not care about the person at the ground level. Let's change that. How to change that? That is your challenge, young ladies. Okay, and all of the young people who are now listening to this conversation. Let's go where it matters, and I'll tell you why. Because over the years, and more recently, I've been appealing to people with a moral conscience. And I believe all of those people have moved. okay? You've made a lot of your parents change. You need to tell your parents, your families, that this is important for your future. And they must talk to the leadership. And if it doesn't, change the leadership, because this is about your future. And it's no longer about politics. It's not a political issue. It's a issue of life, survival. And so I think this is where we need to go next. Otherwise we just waste our time having these conferences year after year. But all we do is go and say what we were told to say.
Yeah.
And it doesn't care what it means in terms of addressing the future of the young people of this world, not the young people of the United States, Australia, or what, okay? Of every young person in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. So if that's not the platform that's going to be the most effective, where do you believe that platform is?
Oh, I think you know that better than I do. I think you've been doing it very effectively in Australia. Yeah. And I think you need to keep doing it because, just the last thing these people need is, they're comfortable. They're untouchable. Let's touch them. Let's touch them where they can feel it, even where it hurts.
Yeah.
I think so. Because we got to change the approach. And I keep advocating this because the ones with the conscience are on board. The ones who really don't care about your future, who believe that they survive this, regardless of what happens to everybody else. They're the ones that remain comfortable. And they're the ones that we need to target, that you need to target.
Yeah, and I think in Australia we come from quite a privileged position in that climate change, whilst we have bushfires, we tend to see that in a little bit less of like an immediate kind of response. It's more like, oh, this is a really terrible disaster. So in Australia, we're really privileged in saying, well, climate change isn't our problem right now, when it actually really should be. And I think young people, and particularly ourselves, we've found that climate change is our immediate issue, and we're learning how to take action on it and lead action on it. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, how can we kind of help boost and emphasize and amplify the voices of people like yourself and your community and your nation who are immediately impacted by climate change?
I think it's what I'm saying is what everybody should be saying. Okay. Yep. The only difference is I'm maybe at the bottom of the spectrum, but I assure you, the spectrum will move. I always talk in terms of the front line, because why I talk about the front line, because we're on the front line. Where I put this terminology is I go fishing a lot, and I go on and I see these trees fall, and then after months I see the next line of trees fall as the land gets eroded. And I assure you, the trees that fall will continue to move back until those of us who believe they're not on the front line will be on the front line. And that is the reality of what this challenge is all about. We've got to understand that it will not stop. And according to what I'm reading, the latest reports, it's getting worse and it's almost beyond the point of no return.
Yeah, and I really hope a lot of people in Australia will come to understand that soon. And just on that, so we hope the next year you'll be able to visit Australia for parliamentary visits and to talk to the Australian people about the urgency of action on climate change. When you are allowed to return to Australia, what will you say to the Australian government, and what do you want to achieve with that?
Well, you know what happened last time I was in Canberra, didn't you? I had a confrontation with one of your ministers who said, and it's unfortunate. I don't know what it was and what the intention was, but I'm sure it was done in jest, I'm sure. But I think it's the interaction, it shouldn't be about me coming to talk to the government in Australia. I think it's about Australia understanding the role that it needs to play in the whole process. And I've continued to advocate that Australia has a huge responsibility to take a leading role in the whole process. And I'm reminded of what Australia is doing just the last few weeks, months, where it's taken a huge lead role in the confrontation with China on this very virus, okay? And I think that's the kind of leadership role that countries like Australia are so capable of doing, okay?
Yeah.
Australia in demanding that there should be an investigation in the role that China did missed out doing, so that here we are paying the price for negligent work by China. And so in demanding that, it's being victimized by China, but it's not buckling down, it's actually coming forward and stepping forward. So I'm hoping that Australia, not simply as a government, but as a people, and I keep saying that's a people, because you, the people, will decide
Yes.
what your government does. If it doesn't do it, you find another government, okay?
Exactly.
That is the idea of why, because governments are supposed to reflect the public will, and if they don't, then something is terribly wrong. Okay, so I believe that, I'd love to do. I think Australia has the capacity, and I've always advocated that Australia can and should take a lead role in the climate issue. Okay, I know that there was a subtle change of response during and after the bushfires, because the bushfires last year were so unprecedented in intensity. I know that. And I felt a bit bad because I predicted there would be a fire, but not the kind of fire she got last year. But I hope we the government or whoever will not wait for the next fire or the next whatever in order to listen to what the scientists have been saying. And so I think it's not me telling your government, it's you telling your government. And so tell your parents. I know there are so many students listening in. Tell your parents, not to allow anybody, any leader who pretends to be a leader, to lead you towards a path of your own self-destruction. That is evil. That is criminal. Okay, and so I don't think you need me telling your government. I think I need you telling your own government.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you did come to Australia, do you think you would prioritize talking to people and community over talking to the parliaments? Yeah.
Absolutely. I love connecting with people, because quite often people are listening but not really seeing the connection of what's being said. Okay, it's interesting, it's inspiring, but it's got to move them into action. It's got to move them into doing something that would result in something that would deal with the challenge. Okay, and so let's hope Australia as a nation will move. Right? Because once you move, I can show you. Once, I know in the last election, climate change was at the top of the agenda, but now it's sliding down again. Okay, because why? Because the ones that are there, maybe, I don't know what impact the corporations have had. But
a big one.
One point that I've always made is, once climate change is a hot political issue, really hot political issue, every politician will become a climate activist. So make them climate activists.
Yeah.
That's the plan.
We mustn't be scared. We're the ones trying to defend ourselves.
Yeah.
Let's scare the ones that are trying to destroy our world.
Exactly. It's a very powerful statement. I think we've talked quite a lot about the destruction and the potential really horrible impacts the horrible impacts of climate change. But I want to ask you, on the flip side of that, if you could think in the most optimistic way possible, what would the best case scenario over the next 5 years be?
No,
it's a big question.
I have never ever thought of climate change as being anything but negative. I think what would be positive is to see a more mobilization of a change in thinking, and not thinking but action. Okay.
Yeah.
And what I believe that needs to happen is to to focus on developing new technology that would make renewable cheaper energy. Actually, because there is no doubt in my mind that it's out there. We just haven't put our minds together because maybe we've been discouraged by the interest corporations that feel their interests are being threatened by the development of these technologies. And so let's do that. And I think as young people, that you have time. That needs to be your focus in leadership.
Yeah.
Go into science. If you go into leadership, tell everybody it's the fossil fuel is no longer a safe source of energy. And so we need to find something else. I understand. I'm very mindful of the realities of what people face in different parts of the world. For me, it's very simple to say, come on, cut the use of coal and fuel. But I have the sun every day. I live in a warm country. I've been in countries where it's extremely cold. And I know that they need, let's do that. There's no reason why that cannot happen as we gradually transition. But to be so lazy and to say, no, even if we don't need it, let's use fossil fuel where it's not absolutely necessary, okay? We've got to understand that we've got to pay these costs if that is the case. But I'm hearing that the cost of renewables is rapidly going down. You know?
Exactly.
So we just need to focus. I think our research institutions, our universities should focus on that, developing new sources of energy, okay? And moving away with the deliberate strategy of moving away from fossil fuel. I'm sure there is enough intellectual capacity there to do something. We just haven't focused. And so we need to do that. I think the best thing that could happen to us is to truly understand how terrible this challenge is. And I'll tell you why it's so terrible. Because with COVID-19, a vaccine is about to be discovered. Once a vaccine is discovered, we forget about it, okay? It's no longer a threat. But the reality is there's no vaccine. The vaccines have been identified. The remedies have been identified for dealing with climate change. But we haven't acquired the desire to make that happen, okay? So we need to make that happen. And the reason is because the forces that really continue to discourage us from doing those are too powerful. But it's because we allow them to remain powerful. Okay? I think,
yeah, exactly.
I'm sure if you're standing in somebody's front yard every morning saying, you know, from an oil company, okay? Standing there screaming, come on, you're destroying my world. Sure, he'll give up. And he'll listen to you. I think, you know, but seriously, we must make their lives uncomfortable because they are destroying your world.
Exactly.
What possible positive scenario? I think hopefully we can come up with the proper course of action before it's too late. It's getting already. It's getting too late. I read the report. I know that the last special report was extremely scary. You know, the melting rate in the Arctic is so fast that it's almost irreversible. And sometimes I have to say, whatever will be, will be. But it's so unfortunate because I've had my turn. You're trying to live the rest of your life. And I hope it's going to be better for you. It's going to be as good for you as it was for me because we didn't do a good job looking after it for you.
Yeah, and just leading on from that, talking about the future a bit, our theme this year is tipping points for Dirrum 2020. And I just want to ask you, do you think we've reached the tipping point in terms of climate change? And if not, what is that tipping point? What do we have to do to get global action, to get action in Australia on climate change?
I'm not a scientist to give you that evaluation, but I am a realist to tell you what I believe might happen. I believe we will go to and beyond the tipping point, the rate we are going at the moment, because we haven't put together the political will, just the will But the sad thing is the ones in the decision-making position are not the ones who will suffer the consequences. And this is why you must fight, okay? But I believe we will go beyond the tipping point. I know for my country, I think we're well beyond the tipping point.
Yeah.
We're well past that, because no matter how we cut, by how much we cut emissions, the momentum of what's already there will continue to ensure that the global warming will continue and the sea level will continue to rise. What that means, but if what is happening in the Arctic regions, an indication of how far we've gone, then it doesn't look too good for us. So the question is, I'm afraid I'm not the scientist, but I'm realist enough to understand human nature. And until there is a radical change, until you can go and stand in front of those front yards, of the CEOs, of the ones that make this happen, until you can make them change what they do, that I'm afraid we will go well beyond the tipping points. It's not a nice thought, but I think sometimes, unless we do something about it, we got to reconcile ourselves to the possible brutal reality of what's about to come.
Yeah,
but let's be optimistic. And what I would say in closing is that is the challenge that you need to take up. Okay? I'm running out of time, but you're not, because you need to do it. Okay, and if they have children, go and talk to their children. He's destroying what? Your future.
Yeah, this is just the beginning for us.
I also believe in never giving up. All right.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have to pull back a little bit to lick my wounds and re-energize, but I don't think I will ever give up, because I'll tell you why I can't do that. I've got 20 grandchildren, and it is for their future. That is, for me, it's a very personal issue. It's very important. And but I must admit that sometimes I feel I'm not making the progress. Climate change is, to a large extent, also a class issue. Okay. And I think it's a class issue. I began to focus on the how it's being stratified into a class issue.
It really has.
Very conscious that you're a busy man. You've got a lot of other stuff to do. So I'm happy to wrap it up now. Is there anything else you wanted to add just before we finish the interview?
I am so inspired by the energy that you young people, you decided to take up this battle. And of course, you need to do that. But what you need to do is get the children of the CEOs of those corporations with you. Okay?
Yeah.
And in spirit, I'll always be with you. And I will always stand with you. But you do have a mission. And I wish you all the very best in that mission. Thank you.
Yeah, Your Excellency, thank you so much for speaking with us today. We look forward to hosting you in the near future in Australia. Fingers crossed.
I hope so, and I look forward to that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pat.
All the best. Te grato.